Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and podcaster.
Okay.
Wait, or am I rips face off someone else underneath? Now I got you, shoot, 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 bang, bang.
Oh man, Jason ripped off his mask to reveal a guy who isn't a podcaster.
Infiltrated the podcast.
I didn't see that twist coming, I gotta say.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's never happened before. So here we are at the beginning of a new season. And
Dave's season.
Dave's year, at least. We decided to see what year our producer, David Rosen, wanted us to cover. And after rejecting many of his choices, we landed here on the year 2000. And Dave, I think we mentioned this in our epilogue for last season, but what is it about this year that you're excited for us to get into?
Well, I thought it was a cool transitional year. You know, we already did 1999, obviously, which is like the big one. But this, I think, goes right along with that and continues into like this kind of very current era without jumping like way ahead to like the latest that you will allow on the podcast, which I agree with, you know. But yeah, I think it's an interesting year. And I also think like, you know, we'll talk about it in our next episode, but I think there's a lot of new filmmakers and actors from around this era that we'll get to talk about. And so, yeah, I think it'll be a fun season.
I think so too. And at the beginning of the season, as always, we're talking about the box office champion. And I think this movie does point to this kind of transition into the franchise-driven, IP-driven era that we live in now. And the movie is Mission Impossible 2 from director John Woo, the global box office champion. I think it was number 2 in the US behind the Jim Carrey Grinch movie for some reason.
Also directed by John Woo.
If only. That movie is the worst. But I have a feeling, given Jason's love for Christmas specials, we may end up going with that movie eventually someday.
We might have to. I've never seen it though. So
it's a ordeal to get through. But,
I like it.
Of course you do, Dave. Well, we'll table that though for the moment and talk about Mission Impossible, the second movie in this very, very popular series, which of course at this time, I mean, the first film had been successful from 1996, directed by Brian De Palma and based on that classic TV series about impossible missions. I guess we could say the TV show about the secret agency that takes on the missions that no one else will take on.
Impossible Mission Force, the IMF.
Exactly. Not to be confused with the International Monetary Fund. I was just watching something recently and some character said that they were going to talk to the head of the IMF. And I was like, is this some sort of Mission Impossible crossover that I didn't realize? But it was not.
Josh, thank goodness one of us has hilarious stories about the IMF.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So this was, in fact, it was the top grossing film globally. It grossed $546.3 million on its budget of between 120 and 125 million, according to Wikipedia. So not a low budget film, of course, but still, that's a massive profit. And I think even though the first film had been a success, this kind of cemented Mission Impossible as this major franchise that could continue on and in fact still continues on.
Yeah, it's strange because I feel like after 3 or 4, right, like it kind of goes up and down, like some are popular, some are not popular. And then Fallout, which is amazing, came out and that kind of rejuvenated the whole franchise. And then Dead Reckoning, not part 1, now just known as Dead Reckoning, the last one, was fine. It was good. It was just a little too much. And people are like, oh, it's a failure, but it still made $500 million and the franchise will still go. But this is one of the tried and true IPs that are, you know, they're still, I mean, if you were like, hey, did you know there were 8 Mission Impossibles? I think most people would probably be like, no, there's only 4 or 5, right?
But there's only 7.
Well, there's the new one's coming out. There's going to be the 8th, genius. I just went over this.
But there isn't 8 yet. It's not finished. So
maybe you haven't seen it, but you're not part of the IMF.
Right. Yeah. The impossible mission to make a Mission Impossible.
I mean,
movie.
Still, 7 is a lot of movies for a franchise.
It is.
And And not just that, considering that like 4 and 5 were kind of like the doldrums, you would say, or some of them were, you wouldn't expect it to get all the way to 7 or 8, would you?
Well, I mean, in terms of box office, it's been consistently successful. This movie, in fact, is, if we're looking at kind of response to it, is probably the low point. I mean, it made all that money, but it is the lowest rated amongst critics on Rotten Tomatoes. It has a 56%, so it is the only one in the franchise that is rated rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. It was nominated for 2 Razzies, for worst remake or sequel, and for worst supporting actress for Thandiwe Newton, which is insane because she's like one of the best things in the film, but whatever.
She's the best thing in the film. I agree with you. And like, why? Well, she's a great actress in general. That just shows you where the Razzies are at. If anything, nominate, Fred Durst in that shitty song.
Yeah, that song is shitty. It also, I was sort of surprised to see that it only got a B cinema score from the audience polling service. And for a big blockbuster IP type movie, that's a really low grade because they're polling the people who go see it on opening night, like the people who are most excited to see it. And so if they're like sort of lukewarm in their enthusiasm, that means that they probably were disappointed.
Well, I could think of, because I watched the first 3 again to prep for this podcast, because I'm dedicated, or because I have no social life. You decide on your own.
Yeah. You're the Ethan Hunt of podcasting. You're just really lasered in on what you need to do.
That's right. That's why I'm single, Josh, because I refuse to put my mate in peril.
Yes.
But the first one, is good. It's got 2 amazing action sequences, which I think are like probably the height of it. And this one is kind of, it again has some great action sequences, and Thandie Newton really, is it Thandie or Tandy, Josh?
Well, it's Thandiwe, actually. Like, I mean, she's credited as Tandy in this film, but that was sort of a like bastardization or whatever of her actual name. And she's gone back to her original like given name, which is Thandiwe Newton.
That's good. But, so she's like the high point, obviously some great action sequences, but I think, really the Ethan Hunt character and the brand doesn't really coalesce until the third one, which also features Philip Seymour Hoffman and probably the best villain performance of the series. So the third one is really where this thing locks in. Although I would say, for 2, the action sequences, John Woo, you kind of know what you're expecting, are very much more stylized than that. So I could see why they would be. I think they just, they're popular, but they didn't really hit their stride until the third one.
Right. I mean, I guess I'm just saying that like I know that critical response to this was mixed or even negative, but it was surprising to me that the audience, who would have been, the most eager to see this, was less than super enthused about it. But critics definitely were not that into it. Ebert and Roper were split on it. It got a thumbs up from Ebert and a thumbs down from Roper, and they both compared it to the James Bond franchise, but Ebert kind of in a positive way, saying that this was sort of a version of James Bond for the modern era. And of course, they're comparing it to the Pierce Brosnan James Bond movies at this time. Roper compared it negatively. They mentioned Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious as well, which I saw in a few reviews that the plot has some similarities to. But again, I think Ebert was looking at that as a favorable comparison, and Roper is saying it doesn't live up to it. So split decision there.
As you know, in our Cary Grant research, I watched Notorious and North by Northwest, both of which have been kind of, I'd say, influential on this movie. And Cary Grant would be the ideal Ethan Hunt from back in the day, wouldn't he?
Yeah, that would be good. I'm sure there's some horrible AI recreation of Mission Impossible starring Cary Grant that we should never, ever look at.
Oh, you are going to poison yourself? Oh, dear.
So in his written review, Roger Ebert said, "The first Mission Impossible had a plot no one understood. Mission Impossible 2 has a plot you don't need to understand. If the first movie was entertaining as sound, fury, and movement, this one is more evolved, more confident, more sure-footed in the way it marries minimal character development to seamless action. It is a global movie, flying no flag, requiring little dialogue, featuring characters who are Pavlovian in their motivation. It's more efficient than the James Bond pictures, but not as much pure fun."
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair criticism, not just for this one, but for a lot of them, is the the plot is insane and hard to follow a lot of the time, right? And it's like, oh wait, you're the bad guy. No, rip the face off. You're a different bad guy or whatever. And like they even repeat the beats of like in this one and 3 where where someone kills someone who they think is someone else, and then they rip the face off, and it's like, oh, you killed the bad guy, not a good guy. And it's so that does get convoluted. And I think where it kind of really straightens itself out is in Fallout, which, clearly my favorite. But then in Dead Reckoning, it gets convoluted again. So who knows?
Yeah, I think like plot wise, this is more straightforward than a lot of the other ones, than the first one, but also some of those later ones, especially the McQuarrie films. To me, like the plot is just it is irrelevant here and it's irrelevant there too, but at least here I could sort of follow it from one thing to another. And in some of the other movies, you just basically stop paying attention because who cares?
Well, this is the only one where he's actually on a mission. Right. That's what I had read. He's always on the run, but now he's on a mission instead of on the run. He's actually trying to do something instead of protect himself.
Right. Yeah. And I think that got old quickly. Like that was the plot of the first movie, that he's disavowed or he's framed for something or whatever. And they kept going back to that again and again and again. And this movie maybe captures the concept of the TV series better, which is, like you said, he's actually sent on a mission, more like a James Bond film or more like those Mission Impossible TV episodes.
Also the only one where someone actually says Mission Impossible. Yes. Sir Anthony Hopkins.
I saw some, like a lot of the negative response, I think in reviews and also people on Letterboxd quote that Anthony Hopkins line where he plays Ethan's boss and he's like, this isn't mission difficult, it's Mission Impossible. And I love that because it's such a silly line. But I think for people who don't like this movie, that's emblematic of what they don't like about it.
Yeah, but also, I mean, it's John Woo, right? Like, John Woo is not, no, he didn't write the script. I mean, it's Robert Towne again and everything. But John Woo is an amazing filmmaker, but subtlety is not what you're going to say is his strength.
Absolutely. That is true. And that's certainly the case in this film. So Owen Gleiberman in Entertainment Weekly was also pretty positive. He said, "This big budget espionage fantasy may be a sequel to Brian De Palma's diverting, if rather convoluted, Mission Impossible, but it's really a high wire act of summer season decadence, with an escalating overkill all its own. The movie is speedy yet languorous, like a James Bond thriller fashioned with Steven Spielberg's gliding camera moves. It's eye candy that detonates. MI2 may be knowingly preposterous, but shot for shot, it's something all too rare. A believe your eyes thriller. John Woo, like De Palma, is a grandiose visual wizard. It's not clear that he's drawn to anything in filmmaking aside from the creation of scenes as voluptuous engineering feats, violent arias of time and space."
Right. So Woo had prepped had ideas for a lot of the action sequences before even the script was written. And that's a cool way to write, because you're writing, hey, how do we get to here and these mountain tops and keep moving. So we all watched some Hong Kong John Woo in preparation for this, and that is a delight. High recommendations from me.
Yeah, I think we all watched Hard Boiled, and that's another one that it has a big action sequence at the beginning that takes place in some sort of weird tea house where people bring birds. That makes no sense, really. And not only did they conceive of that before writing the script, they shot it before, like, finalizing what the story was. And so, it's clear, that Woo is interested in these set pieces. And I think especially probably in these Hollywood movies where he's not involved in the writing. He, maybe does, I don't know, like, I think Thandiwe Newton has talked about how he didn't speak a lot of English necessarily. So whether he even fully read the script, who knows? He's really just focused on what he can bring set piece wise and visually to the movie, and he brings it.
Watch Hard Boiled, man. I love that movie. That was so awesome.
It was fun. Jason loved that a lot more than I did, but it's certainly an action classic. So finally, Dennis Harvey in Variety hated this movie. Elsewhere in this review, he compares it both to Showgirls and to Battlefield Earth, which is a movie we'll talk about later this season.
And we should have mentioned Showgirls completely been reassessed since this point in time.
So. Indeed. But those two movies that at this time were considered just like the bottom of the barrel. So he says, Tom Cruise, action ace director John Woo, a title so pre-sold it's being marketed as its own abbreviation, plus all the slow-mo stunts $150 million or so can buy. With key elements like those, Mission Impossible 2 looks licensed to take the world's money and run. Yet good looks can deceive. Even more empty a luxury vehicle than its predecessor, MI2 pushes the envelope in terms of just how much flashy packaging an audience will buy when there's absolutely nada inside. Some effect is extravagant eye candy that, if not dull, never builds the emotional engagement or genuine suspense a good roller coaster ride requires. All highlights, no glue. It's like a 2-hour trailer for itself.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't like it. That's fine. I can't fault him on the points that he didn't like, because those are all valid points. I just thought, like, I'm going in, I'm going to enjoy the action spectacle. It's still 2 hours. We haven't gotten to the point where it's 2.5 hours, right? We have some good relationships and some good building blocks moving forward. So I didn't mind all that. But going back and revisiting this franchise, I think Mission Impossible 3 might have been the last one I had seen in the theater before Fallout came out. So I kind of got bored with the franchise too.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because I think I have the opposite perspective where, to me, Ghost Protocol, the fourth one directed by Brad Bird, is easily the best film in the series. And I find those McQuarrie movies kind of boring. So to me, like, the initial, whether it was on purpose or not, but what happened with those first four, or really first five, once they bring McQuarrie in, where they bring in a different director each time who really has a very clear, distinctive vision that is separate from what the previous director brought. I really liked that about this franchise. And, you watch the first one and you can see the Brian De Palma-ness of it. And you watch this one and you see the John Woo-ness of it. And even though J.J. Abrams, who directed Mission Impossible 3, was not like an established director, you can clearly see his own ideas and style and whatever that he brought to that one. So I think you're right, though, that the tone and narrative kind of approach that we expect now from this franchise really was established in that later film. And Abrams, even though he only directed the one, I think it remains like a producer on all of them.
With J.J. Abrams, the best stuff is like the character work and not the action stuff. The action is fine, but it doesn't have like the kind of thrust that like a Woo action sequence has. I gotta rewatch Ghost Protocol, so I will let you know on that. But Fallout's not just the best of the series. Like, I would rank that up there with Die Hard as like one of the best action movies ever made.
And I remember liking it at the time, but I literally could not tell you a single thing about it right now. So
he falls out of a plane.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like that's the thing too. I mean, maybe we'll talk about this more later, but like those later movies are so focused on like what insane stunt did we get Tom Cruise to do that everything else is an afterthought, and it's still 2.5 hours long.
Yeah, but that's what Tom Cruise wants, right? Like,
absolutely.
So, I mean, I wanted to get back to the director thing because each director was offered a sequel, like to do the next one in the series, except for John Woo.
Which is interesting because in one review or some contemporary piece that I read, it is claimed that like, a sequel directed by John Woo is already set. And I don't know what the source was for that person's assertion, but I mean, obviously that didn't happen. And it's not necessarily surprising if he wasn't offered it. I mean, Woo clearly was not particularly satisfied with his work in Hollywood. And this was a movie where it was compromised. His vision was kind of taken away and producers put out a movie that they wanted based on like for the Mission Impossible franchise. So that's not necessarily surprising. But I think there's plenty of John Woo style here that remains, even if they took some out.
Definitely. Woo's cut was 3.5 hours, and then they locked him out of the editing room, and Tom Cruise basically edited it the way he wanted to get it down to 2 hours. But I would think like, had they been able to coalesce on that, because Tom Cruise controls everything in the franchise, right? That it would have made sense to keep going with him, just to say like, hey, we're going to do this script exactly how we want it. And you do what you do best, which is take these action sequences to the next, height here. But, we move on in different directions, and it seems to have worked out for everyone, Josh.
Yeah, I think so. So did you see this one in the theater, Jason?
I did see this one in the theater. I was excited, because of John Woo. because Face Off is my favorite of his American movies, and I've been rewatching it, and it's still awesome. I'm not all the way through it again, but I was excited for it, but like I said, I don't think it's really hit its stride at this point yet.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen Face Off since I saw it, I think, in the theater, but I loved that. And I had enjoyed other John Woo American films. I was a big Jean-Claude Van Damme fan at that time.
Hard Target?
I'd seen Hard Target, yeah, and Broken Arrow as well. So I think I was excited for that and less about the Mission Impossible franchise. Although I do like the De Palma film, and I've seen it again since initially watching it, and I think not being as into it. So I think I was excited for this, and I liked this. It got this mixed response at the time, but I remember really liking it. And when I've revisited it, I still enjoy it. I understand that it's maybe not the best movie in this franchise, and that there's other things that the different Mission Impossible movies do better, especially in terms of what's kind of been established as the style of this franchise. But some people really hate this movie, and I really don't get that. I think it's a lot of fun, and there's a lot of positive elements of it, and we'll talk about those more. But, the John Woo set pieces, as we said, Thandiwe Newton's performance, as we've said, it's an entertaining film to watch.
I agree. I liked it just fine. I do think that you could say on those first two movies, like in prepping for this today, I went on Wikipedia and reread the plot, and I was very confused by rereading the plot summary of this. Like, watching the movie was clearer than like having to actually describe it. But I think in this one, in the first one, definitely in the last one, you're like, wait, what? Huh? Like it does get very muddled and confusing. And they do rely a lot on, and especially in this one, on like the conveniences of like everyone can have someone else's face,
Yeah.
and like we can just do that and, move the plot along because of that.
Right. Yeah. I did feel like watching this, that the plot was not that difficult to follow versus the first one, where the plot is completely confusing, and a lot of those later ones. But I can see how if you're just trying to like read it, bullet point it or something, because there's a lot of, switchbacks and double crosses and things like that are a bit confusing. So Dave, did you watch this in the theater when it opened?
I did. I also liked it back then. I had not rewatched it since then, though, as much as I love these movies. I just never revisited this one. And yeah, I also thought it was a lot of fun. It's not the best Mission Impossible, but I genuinely do not understand the hate this movie gets. It just doesn't make any sense to me. But I did rewatch Face Off for the first time in years and years, and it is freaking perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have loved to have time to watch that, but Jason and I we watched Hard Boiled together, and that was a lovely experience. And I was more keen on watching that because I'd never seen any of the John Woo Hong Kong films, but I would love to revisit Face Off at some point too.
Dave, you'll be amused. Josh and I were reminiscing of a high school. In high school, we created a sketch idea called Pants Off, where it's a takeoff of Face Off, but they just switch pants, but no one can tell them apart because they're wearing the other one's pants now.
Nice.
But I wanted to ask you, Dave, because I'm on record with Fallout as the best, and Josh says Ghost Protocol. What do you think the best in the franchise is?
It's funny that those are you guys' two picks, because I go back and forth between those two movies. Exactly. I think I have to go Fallout just because it's just so damn fun. But I will say Ghost Protocol was the moment you were talking about, Jason, like, 3 being where it kind of became what it is now. Like, Ghost Protocol to me is like where I turned around on Tom Cruise. I was like, oh, this guy is the best. Like, I can't wait to see everything he does from here on out. Whereas before that, he was crazy Tom Cruise,
I mean, he still is.
He still is, yeah.
But he's so much, by 3, he becomes even more charming. I think in these first 2, like, he's even still feeling out this character.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and there's a definite evolution of the character that you can see, and there's stuff they do with the character in this one that they definitely would never do in one of the later films. Whether you think that's good or bad, we can discuss. Is there anything else about the background of this movie you want to talk about, Jason?
Besides offering this to De Palma, Oliver Stone was once attached to direct this, which that would have gone deep into the conspiracy wormhole, but it might have worked because the whole plot of this is about a virus outbreak and also, creating a cure for it so they can make money. So that seems like it would have been up his alley.
Yeah, I don't know if Oliver Stone is the right guy to direct a big blockbuster action movie, though.
Isn't it weird watching this movie after after the pandemic?
Little
Yes. Yes, it is. We can talk more about that. We will get into more of our general thoughts on Mission Impossible 2 when we come back. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year in this premiere of our season on the films of the year 2000. We are talking about box office champion Mission Impossible 2. And I think we're in agreement that this is better than I think maybe its reputation has it.
I mean, has this been reassessed at all,
I
Josh,
really
or
don't
no?
think that it has.
I
No,
don't
not
think
in a
so
general
either.
sense. I mean, maybe by the three of us here right now, but not overall.
Reassessment complete, guys.
Yeah.
This has been fully rehabbed because of us.
Awesome
Yes.
Movie Year 2000 is going to lead the charge.
Trailblazers right here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What I take from this after watching a lot of the John Woo stuff that we watched, because I also watched The Killer, which he's also now remaking as an English language film. And, we talked about Face Off, is he just comes out of the gate with these huge action sequences. So it propels the momentum. And like the first half hour of this is all action in its own way, right? You got this kind of plane heist situation, and then you have Tom Cruise doing his first insane stunt, which is one of the most memorable and insane stunts of the series, if not on film, where he's doing this free solo climb in Moab, Utah. And John Woo is like nervous that he was going to die. And he almost did die, apparently. But supposedly there were like wires attached to him, but it still seemed very dangerous and it's harrowing to watch. And, you kind of have this whole first half hour and then you have to actually set up the story. And I think that you could say, or maybe it's the first 10 or 15 minutes, and then he's in Spain and he's meeting Thandiwe Newton and that the flamenco sequence, I could see where that slows it down for people. And they have that kind of meeting in the bathtub where one's on top of the other. And I think that's been done much better with him and love interests like flirting in the course of working in later episodes of the series.
See, I love that sequence. I mean, I think the action is great, but one of the things I also really like about this movie is that playful, flirty relationship that they establish between Ethan and Naya, the Thandiwe Newton character, early on. And I really liked their chemistry. I thought, to me, I mean, and maybe, I haven't revisited all the later movies, but to me, one of the things that they do with Ethan Hunt is that and this is a Tom Cruise thing also in a lot of his, as he gets to be this bigger and bigger, just like blockbuster guy, is that he becomes sort of sexless. And the playfulness and the flirtation here is way dialed down. I mean, even when he's married to Michelle Monaghan's character, right, in Mission Impossible 3, I feel like there's less of that sexiness to their relationship. But again, I'd have to revisit it.
I think in the last one we get it though, right? In Dead Reckoning with him and Haley Atwell, right?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I think I was going to mention that to me does seem like a bit of a return of that, but it still feels very chaste in a way that this version doesn't, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we keep mentioning that she is the strength of this movie, and that's like no offense to like Tom Cruise is still obviously Tom Cruise, but he's still getting there. I think the other rock of this thing is Ving Rhames, who is like, he's getting a lot of great paychecks, but he's the thankless hero in this franchise, right?
Right.
Like he's great. And I'm so glad, we talked about him in Pulp Fiction, but I think Ving Rhames is an underrated actor.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's funny, I mean, if we talk about the legacy, but you look at his like filmography post this, and it's like 5 B movies I've never heard of, Mission Impossible 3, 8 B movies I've never heard of, Mission Impossible 4. Like, he's working really steadily, but he doesn't get the more high profile roles that you think he might get by being part of this major franchise.
And he should get them. I mean, I know Sandler uses him a lot also, or has in the past, but Ving Rhames has that, famous Golden Globe moment where he won for playing Don King and he said acting's all about sharing and he gave the award to Jack Lemmon on stage. I think Ving Rhames is due, maybe it's in a limited series or something, but for another breakout, I just think he's got a real presence about him. Everything comes off as very like honest, like you feel like it's an authentic performance. Like that Luther character is really good.
Yeah, he is. And I feel like as this series has gone on, there's a meta aspect of it too, because he's the only one who's still there. When he's like, oh, Ethan, what are you doing now? You can think of it being Ving Rhames like, oh, Tom Cruise, what are you doing now? And that's an amusing aspect to it as well.
Right. And I guess, Shaun of the Dead, our buddy, doesn't come in until the third one, right? And now he's the other key team member there.
Right. Yeah. Simon Pegg, who became a major element of the franchise as well. And McQuarrie has carried over. I mean, Rebecca Ferguson has been in a few and Jeremy Renner has been in a couple. I mean, there's others, but Ving Rhames is the one who's like holding it down since the beginning.
I think so. Jeremy Renner, Mr. Almost franchise, right?
Right.
This was supposed to be, they were supposed to pass the franchise along to him and they didn't. And, where do they go? Who's the next Ethan Hunt then, Josh?
Well, no one. I think that's the thing, is that Tom Cruise keeps hinting that he'll retire from it or whatever, and then he won't. And we'll see. But Harrison Ford just made an Indiana Jones movie at 80, so I think, or 80 plus, maybe even, I don't know. But I think Cruise is aiming to continue on in that tradition.
I mean, it's Glenn Powell, right? It's got to be Glenn Powell. That's the next guy in line.
It could be. He did something like that. He was in one of the Expendables movies where he was one of the like team members with Stallone, and that didn't work out that well.
I mean, if you watch Top Gun Maverick, the whole point is that no one can do it except for Tom Cruise. So.
Right. Yeah, and Glenn Powell is in that movie.
Yeah, but still, I need Tom Cruise.
But a part of it is that no one can do it like Tom Cruise. He is that charismatic. He's, I think, the only actor willing to do these stunts because he says like, hey, the audience knows when it's not you. And I'm like, I'm an audience and I don't know, but you're insane. There's that whole final hand-to-hand combat fight with Dougray Scott, who we should talk about next. But Cruise insisted that Dougray Scott use a real knife in that fight, and they rigged up some cable where the knife would stop a quarter inch from Tom Cruise's eye. And Cruise is like, you have to pull this as hard as you can so it looks real, right? If that doesn't work, he's dead. He's an insane person, man. And it is amazing to see the stunts this guy does.
Yeah, it is amazing. But on the other hand, I think that shot is a good example because it ends with this, it has this close up and you see Ethan's eye or Tom Cruise's eye with that knife, like right almost there. And like, that's a really cool looking shot. But if you told me that was like a composite shot, I would believe you. Like, it would have been just as good to do it that way. It would have been okay. So, I mean, I do feel like you're right. It's sort of unnecessary sometimes where if he's like, oh, you would know it wasn't me, or some of these things, like whichever one is the movie where they do the McQuarrie movie where they do the halo jump or whatever. And, they
plane from the plane.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. That's Fallout, the greatest one.
And that's a cool sequence, but like learning about the behind the scenes stuff of it, it doesn't, I feel like you don't get the impact of it more so. Like you watch the behind the scenes and you're like, wow, this is amazing how much effort they put into it. And then you watch the scene and you're like, yeah, that was cool. But they probably could have done it another way. It would have been just as cool.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you on that because that Halo sequence is, I think there's like, that New York Times kind of, it's not a column, but it's a ongoing feature where they're like behind the scenes and they break down a scene. And I remember watching that one on the Halo sequence. They basically had like 2 to 3 minutes a day to get that right. And they did it, I think, 100 days in a row or something like that, which is Tom. And then I think people are like, oh, well, we know from social media he's going to do this insane thing and we want to see how it all looks. So I think that actually ramps up the series and like people look forward to that stuff now.
Yeah. And I feel the opposite. Like I also saw behind the scenes. I don't know if it's the same one that was on the New York Times site, but I remember going to CinemaCon that year before it came out and they showed this whole behind the scenes thing as a preview. So I understand what went into it. What I'm saying is that when you learn what went into it and then you watch the sequence, my thought is like, none of that is like in the sequence, right? And if it had been done a different way, it would have still looked cool. Like the fact that they went to these insane lengths to do it didn't make it better as a like element of the film or whatever. It's only as like extra textual knowledge that it's cool.
But it looks awesome in the film too.
It does, but I feel like it doesn't, like it could have easily looked just as awesome if they had done it in a less risky way.
I agree with you, but I'm saying because of that, like as an audience member, I'm putting those two things together. I know that he's actually jumping out of the plane. I want to see how this looks, and that adds to my enjoyment of it. Although none of us would be surprised if he dies doing a stunt.
Right. And it would not be worth it for a movie. I mean,
it would not be.
I guess it, maybe he somehow thinks that it would be. But yeah, what I'm saying is that it doesn't add to my enjoyment. It doesn't detract from my enjoyment, but I feel like it's sort of excessive. And it, in a way, it is distracting because the focus, and this is away from this one, because even though there was a lot of press and attention on that sequence, the free solo climbing sequence, it wasn't anywhere near the level that they focus on the stunts in the later movies. But I do think that the fact that that's what people care about, and not like, what is the story? What are the characters doing? How are the relationships and all of that, leaves these movies really empty.
Maybe. I mean, at least they're honest with what they're doing, I think. And I mean, I think the McQuarrie ones are trying to dig for something deeper, some emotional. I think that's why Fallout connected so well, because it had the stunts, had the emotional connection of it. But that free solo sequence is harrowing to watch, isn't it?
I mean, I guess, but it's still not as harrowing to watch as the movie Free Solo starring Alex Honnold, right?
That's true, but he's also the greatest free solo climber in the world. And you're like, if anyone can do it, it's this guy. But when you watch this, you're like, what is with you, Tom Cruise? You're not Alex Honnold. Why are you doing this?
Yeah, but you know that it's all going to work out because it's in the movie, right? And so, like, whether he did it all for real, or there were wires, or he was in a studio, like, it looks cool. I'm not saying it doesn't. It's a great sequence. It really is. But to say that it's harrowing, or that I'm like, oh my God, what is going to happen to Tom Cruise here? I don't feel any emotion at all.
No, I'm going to disagree, because that now you're saying you're disconnected from the character. And if we go back to like Mission Impossible, the original one, and they're on top of the train and they're doing that fight, that's harrowing to me, because I want, I expect Tom Cruise to win everything, right?
Sure.
But it's still like, I'm still invested in watching how it's going to turn out, and seeing these crazy jumps or whatever he's doing are like, those are exciting to watch.
I think there's two separate things. Like, it can be harrowing in the context of the film, where it's suspenseful and you're like, what's going to happen to the character? And I think in this case, with that specific sequence, that's not what it is, because it's just the opening of the movie, and he's not going to fall off the mountain in the opening of the movie, and there's not even a villain to fight. But I agree that there are parts of the movie that get you invested in that way. Like, yeah, Ethan Hunt is going to survive, but how is he going to get out of this, and what's going to happen here? And it's suspenseful. But I think that is entirely different from saying it's harrowing because you knew Tom Cruise really did it and Tom Cruise was in danger. And that sense never comes across to me in any of these films.
Yeah, I guess we're just on different pages here.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Dougray Scott. Is he the weakest villain in the entire franchise? I
mean, he's a weak villain. On the other hand, I'm not sure I could tell you who was the villain in any of the, even Ghost Protocol, which I love, in any of the post Mission Impossible 3 movies. So those, I mean, Dead Reckoning, the villain like wasn't even a person.
AI.
Yeah, it's like not even in the movie.
Well, he has in Dead Reckoning, the villain is facilitated by another villain who is also a villain in a different Mission Impossible
Dead Reckoning's
movie.
A mess, guys.
Yeah, but I mean, I could not tell you who was the villain in Fallout or who was the villain in Rogue Nation. I do
Henry
not know.
Cavill was the villain in
and the
Fallout,
other guy,
the
guy that talks like this.
Yeah,
that guy I don't remember. I remember, but Henry Cavill was more like a henchman, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was like a henchman. Yeah,
but they had that awesome fight, and he was a bad guy. So
Look,
I'll still take indiscernible villains over maybe Dougray Scott. I just think this is a complete miss of a performance, and Dougray Scott is a quality actor who's doing good work in other things, but he's just not a good fit here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you that this is a weak villain, and Dougray Scott is a fine actor, but I think, you look at his subsequent filmography, he's not like a movie star actor, right? He's just kind of a workhorse actor. And you need someone with a greater level of charisma again, I haven't seen Mission Impossible 3 in a long time, but I remember Philip Seymour Hoffman in that because he's such a great villain.
Yeah. And it's amazing because Hoffman goes the exact opposite way of Cruise, right? Cruise is big and boisterous and energized, and Hoffman is so low and just kind of like boiling over, but like in a very quiet way. I mean, he can get loud, but it's still like so calm the whole time. And it's a very interesting performance. I really enjoyed watching that this week. But I just think the Dougray Scott, that brings this movie down, in that it's just, you're right. He's this rogue agent, he's stealing the virus and just so he can get the cure to make money. And it's just like, all right, dude. And, obviously his ex is Thandiwe Newton. And it's like, yeah, all right, whatever, man. And, those fights with those two at the end, the motorcycle and the hand-to-hand, I don't think are as good as some of the stuff earlier in the movie.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's still cool stunts, but it's not cool because you're really invested in their like rivalry or whatever, or in the villain and whether he's going to triumph or not. I mean, I think there is a certain campiness to that character, and the campiness overall is one thing that I do enjoy about this movie. And there are moments, I think, when Dougray Scott, I wish he had leaned in more and just made this character even more ridiculous and silly. I mean, the one line I always remember is, so Naya is supposed to be his ex, right? And Ethan recruits her and says, you got to go back to him so that we can use you to spy on him and find out what he's doing and where the virus is or what he's trying to do or whatever. So she does that. And his henchman, played by Richard Broxburgh, is skeptical. And he's like, don't you wonder why she's here? Like, when she left before, she wasn't exactly gagging for it. And Dougray Scott has this great line where he's like, I am gagging for it. And it's just like, this guy is a pervert and I'm into it, and I wish there was more of that.
We talked about Face Off. That's the type of performance you need for a bad guy in this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because Face Off there, I mean, and I haven't seen it in forever, but like Travolta and Cage in Face Off are like out insaning each other, right? They're just like topping each other.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. Right. And that is what you need.
Because with that movie, Nick Castor-Troy, the Nicolas Cage character, is already on a Nick Cage level of insanity. And then when John Travolta becomes him, John Travolta goes so hard at it. It's just, they both are just so committed. I love it.
Yeah. And I don't know if you have the alternate casting, Jason, if there were other choices for the villain, but, a different actor might have been able to like bring that to this character, even with the same exact script and the same exact lines. And Dougray Scott, for the most part, is just kind of playing it straight and dull. And he could have been the villain on a TV show.
Would have been great to have John Travolta look at Thandiwe Newton and go, "Woo-wee, you good looking."
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But yeah, no, I mean, the only alternate casting I have is on the Anthony Hopkins character, where he's the mission commander. And this is the only time we see him, so. And that was offered to Ian McKellen. And what's interesting, Josh, you and I were talking about this, because this film went so far over on the estimated shoot dates. Dougray Scott had to drop out of X-Men, and that went to Hugh Jackman, which I think that worked out for the best.
Right. I mean, you have to wonder if Dougray Scott has like spent the last 25 years cursing Mission Impossible 2 for preventing him from being Wolverine.
Well, but you're talking about how he's not a movie star. It seems like everyone wanted him to be a movie star at this point in time, right?
And the question, of course, is like, well, if he had been cast as Wolverine, would that have created a character that became as successful and beloved as the Hugh Jackman Wolverine? And probably not.
Probably not. I mean, but Hugh Jackman is a special talent also, right?
Yeah.
So, but with that, that Hopkins role was originally offered to Ian McKellen. And had Ian McKellen taken that role, he would have had to miss being Gandalf. And like, dude, you can't see anyone else as Gandalf there, right? So the only one who really won by staying in this movie was Thandiwe Newton, because she got out of Charlie's Angels. But that's not necessarily a win, because the first one was good, but supposedly there was a lot of problems going on with her being cast in that. And I was reading about like her and Nia Long, and they were saying that they weren't respected as women of color and all this stuff. And it just seems like, I mean, that part eventually went to Lucy Liu, but that's different, different ethnicities. So I think hopefully we're past that.
Yeah, hopefully, but probably not. Nia Long, speaking of, I mean, this is a digression, but she's a like real, like one of those missed stars. You watch some of her early stuff. I remember watching The Best Man, and she's so good in that. And it's like, why wasn't she a movie star? I mean, and I think we just answered that question, but definitely one of those like, missed opportunities for someone who could have been so much bigger. And even Thandiwe Newton, I mean, she's very famous, and we'll talk about her other stuff, but she's not a movie star on the level of like, well, I guess Cameron Diaz and Drew Barrymore kind of aren't anymore these days, but both by their own choices. And they were for like a really, really long time. And, she never achieved that same level.
I don't think that's a bad thing for her because she's a very good actress. And I think I personally like seeing her act in parts as opposed to doing movie star stuff. So I think she might even agree that worked out for the best.
Yeah. And I think her best moments in this movie are the acting moments, are those moments where she's connected with Ethan and they have that chemistry and the, playfulness and the banter or whatever, or even later in the movie where we have a few moments where she's kind of anguished over like, why is he making me do this? And why am I trapped in this situation kind of stuff? Although for the most part, she's just a pawn, which is frustrating.
She's important in the first half hour and then just becomes, like you're saying, a plot device going forward. So, yeah. Josh, I thought, so there's a lot of the Woo trademarks and a lot of the Mission Impossible trademarks. The Woo trademarks include like the Mexican standoff, gun to gun, and then we're swirling the camera around. I noticed that in The Sand, Ethan Hunt kicks up the gun to himself, which is something that he did in The Killer. And of course, slow-mo, doves, all that fun stuff that we love from John Woo. But I'm surprised that you like John Woo so much because I know for a fact you hate that swirling 360 shot. So I didn't know that, his style of filmmaking, I thought might be like too aggressive for you.
Yeah, I mean, it is at times. And, as we saw when you and we watched Hard Boiled, which I enjoyed, but not nearly to the level that you did. And I think that's another one where there's even less plot in that movie, I think, than there is in this. And it's just like nonstop, sort of almost abstracted action for like an hour. And that does kind of wear on me. But what I dislike about that 360 shot is that it's so often unmotivated. And I feel like here, where this is a movie that's all about like stylized presentation, it's of a piece with whatever else he's doing. What annoys me is when filmmakers use it in this very cliched way in like a drama where suddenly the character is having this like moment of crisis and you spin the camera around and it's like, come on, this is lazy or whatever. And I think whatever you want to say about John Woo, you could never call him lazy.
I wouldn't, Josh. Hard Boiled, the sequence that Josh is talking about, halfway through the movie, they end up in a hospital, and then the whole second half of the movie is literally like a one location action sequence that's just like, oh, I was all in on it. Give me that good, bro.
Yeah, and a lot of it was enjoyable, but to me, it went on and on and on and on and on past the point where I was invested in it. But I mean, I think as great as John Woo is at the action, he's also just a great visual stylist in little moments. There was one thing that I noted down, one brief shot. At one point, Ving Rhames is sitting outside something in the command van or whatever, and a bad guy like plants a bomb under the van. And the way that he becomes aware is that he looks in his like side view mirror, and the reflection in the mirror sees a reflection in a puddle of the countdown clock of the bomb on the bottom of the van. And it's like a, half-second moment, but it's just so elegantly constructed to get to the point where obviously he's going to have to realize it and he's going to get away in time or whatever. But the way he does that, I just thought was really beautiful. And there's a lot of little moments like that.
I love that so much too. And like I said, I hadn't seen this since it came out. I hadn't seen Face Off in probably 20 years, but there were so many shots in both of these movies that they just stuck with me since, 10, 20 years. And I mean, I think that speaks to just how great he is at composing those things.
Yeah. I mean, that stuff is all so good that I wish Dougray Scott was better. I wish there was a better villain. I wish the plot was a little more engaging. I wish Thandiwe Newton had more to do beyond the first half an hour or whatever, because the rest of it is really fun. And I still think this is an enjoyable movie that is really unfairly maligned.
Yeah, I will agree with you. You mentioned Richard Roxburgh as Hugh, who's good and has a real character, but I think John Polson as Billy, the helicopter pilot, also kind of is a letdown, obviously, compared to what Simon Pegg basically takes that place going forward. And I think, yeah, there were just some misses here that it didn't all coalesce, but that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. John Polson, who's the third member of their team that he recruits along with Luther, and even other characters like not Simon Pegg, who, as we said, kind of continues on through the franchise, but there's other ones that are just one-offs that still make more impressions, like Paula Patton and Maggie Q in Ghost Protocol, who never came back, but they're both really good, and they make a much stronger impression in their single appearances than John Polson does here as this character that like basically could not even exist. It would be the same.
I had read that was originally Steve Zahn, and I think Steve Zahn would have been a better fit for that.
Yeah, it could have brought some personality. Again, even if it was the exact same lines, the exact same script, bring something else to the table that is just not there.
Josh, I have one question. When was the last time you watched Rain Man?
I actually watched Rain Man, I want to say maybe a year ago or something like that, because I was writing a piece on the best Tom Cruise movies to watch and I had never seen it, and I fucking hate Rain Man.
All right, but that's not my question, Josh.
Okay.
It's interesting to me because Rain Man, the song Aiko Aiko is such a big part in that one, and then he uses a different version of it here. He must really love that song.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. That is true. It shows up here, and who knows if that was Cruise's choice or John Woo's choice or whatever, because John Woo is good with the music too, I think.
I agree. John Woo, check him out.
Yeah, John Woo. Check out this little known filmmaker, John Woo.
Well, no, but I mean, when this movie came out, like, us as film people, we were all already on that John Woo train, right? But like you said, he's gone back to Hong Kong. I mean, he did make Silent Night last year, but I think like he's not on like the radar as much as he was when he first came, and we were like, oh, John Woo is making a Face Off, an American movie, and he's done these others, but this is really the one. Like, I think he's not in the conversation as much anymore over here.
Yeah, maybe so. And I mean, I was on the John Woo train, as you say, but I had not seen those Hong Kong movies like when this came out. In fact, I had not seen any of them until we watched Hard Boiled this week. So part of that is, unlike Hard Boiled, many of the rest of his Hong Kong movies are really hard to find in the US right now. The rights are tied up in some way, and they're not available to stream or to rent digitally, and they're out of print on DVD. So it's tougher for people to watch them. But I think there was definitely a big following, like a cult following in the US for those John Woo Hong Kong movies when he first came to the US, but they weren't widely known necessarily. And certainly, I mean, for me, like when I was a teenager or whatever, and I saw Hard Target, I was excited to see a Van Damme movie. I didn't know who John Woo was.
I think Tarantino, again, is another one who kind of helped bring Woo to the forefront out here.
Yeah, and deservedly so, as we've said. So you want to rate this?
Let's rate this thing out of 5 face masks, Josh.
5 face masks. That's fewer face masks than are in the film, I think. But
I think this is the most of all the face mask movies, So.
Yeah, and again, I feel like that's another like of the campy elements, because one time you're like, oh yeah, it's that thing. And then a few times you're like, maybe this is too much. And then a few more times you're like, oh, they know it's too much, and they're playing with the fact that it's too much. And that's
I disagree. I feel like it was just a contrivance of like, hey, we have to move this plot along here.
Yeah,
so let's do this.
I found it to be kind of amusing and campy, but I'm going to give this 3 face masks out of 5. I've been very positive on it, but I do think it has some serious shortcomings, but certainly not nearly as bad as some people think it is. If you've heard that, but you've seen later Mission Impossible movies, especially the McQuarrie ones, it's worth going back and watching this. It is a lot of fun.
You know what, Josh? I'm going to just leave it at 3 and go with exactly what you said. 3.
All right. Dave, how would you rate this?
Well, like I said on my Letterboxd by David Rosen, I was going to go 3.5, but I bumped it up to 4 just because that last 20 minutes is just so campy and over the top. And I had so much fun with that action sequence.
Yeah, it is a lot of fun. It is absolutely a lot of fun. So we'll come back in a moment and talk about the legacy of Mission Impossible 2. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year in this season premiere of our season on the films of the year 2000. We're talking about box office champion Mission Impossible 2. And in terms of the legacy, we've really talked about the franchise here a lot. Mission Impossible 3, directed by J.J. Abrams. The fourth film, Ghost Protocol, directed by Brad Bird. And then Christopher McQuarrie coming in to direct the next three and the upcoming eighth film in the series. Remains a massive juggernaut in terms of blockbuster cinema.
Right. Even this last one where people, I might have already said this, were like, oh, it's a bomb. It still made, the 500 million. And I'm sure it made money for the company overall. And, I think they realize afterwards what some of the shortcomings were, and they'll probably course correct that.
Yeah, and I wonder, we were talking earlier about the idea that they were going to hand this over to Jeremy Renner at one point. I mean, he becomes a big character in Ghost Protocol, and then by the time he shows up in Fallout, he's kind of relegated to the sidelines. But, at one point, Cruise and McQuarrie had said that Dead Reckoning and this upcoming, which was going to be Dead Reckoning Part 2, and now we'll have a different title, but that kind of dual film would have been a send-off for Ethan Hunt, and maybe who knows what they'll do with the franchise after that. And then Cruise kind of backtracked on that and was like, no, I could do more. But because maybe, as you said, relative to the insane success of this franchise, Dead Reckoning didn't do quite as well. I wonder if they'll go back to that idea of trying to wrap up Ethan Hunt's story in this next movie and leave the door open to bring in some new faces or whatever.
They definitely won't. It's Tom Cruise. He's the franchise, Josh.
Yeah.
So the last real movie star until Timothée Chalamet showed up on screen, right? And Emma Stone, I'd say maybe. But I think, first of all, Josh, Tom Cruise, we know, loves to run, but in this one, he does a lot of flipping. I didn't realize Ethan Hunt flips so much. There's so many somersaults and flips. I think they'll write it, but to me, more than that is like, we got Top Gun, and we know Tom Cruise is a great actor, and, he's in his 60s. So at some point you think like, hey, are you going to just slow down a little? And I don't think he will, because I still would like to see him do, one big action franchise and then one kind of cool drama piece or something different. I love movie star Tom Cruise, but I think actor Tom Cruise is great, as we've said before.
Yeah, and I mean, in the really one of the legacies of this film is that you look at his career following this, and other than like a very small number of films, almost everything he does is one of those big blockbuster franchise things, whether it's a Mission Impossible movie or Top Gun or something that was meant to be a franchise and failed, like The Mummy. But either way, it's all on that insane level. And I agree with you. They're probably not going to hand off Mission Impossible to someone else. Even if they have a pseudo wrap up for Ethan Hunt, they'll leave the door open for Tom Cruise to do another movie. But I do appreciate that Cruise finally, just very recently, has said, I want to get back to maybe doing some smaller dramas. And I know he's supposed to star in the next film from Alejandro González Iñárritu, which I don't care for him as a filmmaker at all. But that is certainly the kind of direction that I would like Cruise to go in, and maybe he'll work with a filmmaker I like a little more. But I agree with you that I hope he at least balances that stuff as going forward.
I mean, we still haven't had our Tom Cruise, Leo DiCaprio movie, and I think that's where we're heading for this, right?
Sure. I'd be up for that. Maybe Scorsese can get them together or something.
I'm in the middle of reading The Wager, who David Grand, the author of Killers of the Flower Moon, which Scorsese said that what's what he wants to do next. And I mean, those guys would be perfect for that movie.
What is that about?
It's about a British ship that tries to sail around South America and gets shipwrecked. There's a lot of books I read about like ships that get shipwrecked, nonfiction books.
Very niche topic that you apparently have a lot of options for.
I mean, it's so crazy, the world that they lived in. You figure like, oh, there's like 20 sailors, and it's like, no, there's 250 people on there all working in these terrible conditions, and like, how do they survive any of these things? But it's worth checking out. The other thing, Josh, that I mean, we know that Tom Cruise is going to do this SpaceX movie because he has to go to space.
Oh God, is that still happening?
Space.
Yeah,
I don't know. The one I'm excited for is Live, Die, Repeat, and Repeat. Which we know was Edge of Tomorrow, right? The sequel to that one.
Yeah,
so
I hope that happens. I do really like Edge of Tomorrow, And I also like Oblivion a lot, which is another underrated sci-fi movie that he made with Joseph Kosinski, who directed Top Gun Maverick, the movie that they made together before that. And they keep talking about that Edge of Tomorrow sequel, and I don't know if it's actually going to happen, but I hope that it does, because that's a really fun movie.
What's your go-to for John Woo, Josh?
Well, I mean, I loved Face Off, like I've said, and I would like to revisit it, but I definitely saw all those, or most of those John Woo American films when they come out. I think the only one I didn't see was Wind Talkers, which he did after this. I mean, this was, his American career kind of petered out after this. He made Wind Talkers, which was his sort of effort to do a serious prestige movie. It's a war drama with Nicolas Cage. And then he made Payback with Ben Affleck, which is a pretty terrible Philip K. Dick adaptation. And after both of those movies failed, he went back to Hong Kong. And but I have seen those. I hadn't seen any of the Hong Kong films until we watched Hard Boiled. I did see Red Cliffs, which was the movie he made when he returned to China. And I've seen the condensed like single film version. It was released as two separate films in China and then as a single film here in the US. Although I think you can watch the 2-part version now online. But I really liked that. That was to me a really good synthesis of like the big historical war epic, but also some like amazing John Woo action sequences. And I found that movie really entertaining.
Was Chow Yun-fat in it?
I don't think so, but I'm not 100% sure.
Because, I mean, those two are synonymous with Killer and Hard Boiled. And, the Killer remake looks like we're going to have a female protagonist, Natalie, what's her name?
Natalie Emanuel, who's in the Fast and Furious movies.
Yeah, and Game of Thrones. And then I was reading about Flying Tiger Heroes, which I don't know if he'll ever make, but it's supposed to be like a big, it's like an aerial unit, an aerial pilot, like war unit. And that seems like that would be definitely something that he could bring that Woo style to.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see that. I haven't seen The Crossing, which is another 2-part like historical epic that he made in China. And then he returned to the US to make Silent Night recently, which I thought was kind of disappointing. But Dave, I think you liked that more than I did.
Yeah, I didn't love it, but it had its moments. And we did do an episode of piecing it together on it. So you could check that out.
Yeah, I wonder how that remake of The Killer will go. FYI, Chow Yun-fat is not in Red Cliff, but Tony Leung, who is in Hard Boiled, is in Red Cliff.
Well, there you go, Josh. There you go, buddy.
Yeah.
Dougray Scott has an International Emmy Award for his performance in the series Crime, the Irvine Welsh series. And, he's doing fine right now. So this just wasn't the right fit for him.
Yeah, I mean, he's doing fine. But again, he does TV stuff. He was on Desperate Housewives and Hemlock Grove and Batwoman. And he's in kind of small parts in films. I mean, he definitely doesn't have the kind of career that that Hugh Jackman has or that Tom Cruise has, or, he doesn't have a movie star career. That's not to say he's not a good actor. He's in a movie that I really like, a kind of sci-fi horror movie called Sea Fever that I think is really good. But he's not anyone that you never watch a movie and think, oh man, Dougray Scott is in this, I got to watch it.
Well, I agree, but he's, he's a reliable actor. Thandiwe Newton, I'm going to tell you, bro, I love the British cop series Line of Duty, and her season, which is season 4, might be the best season of the entire series. And she is amazing in that. So high recommendation for me on that one.
Yeah. My mom also a big fan of Line of Duty, thanks to your recommendation. So
shout out to Dale. Glad I could help. Let me know what you're watching.
Yeah. Of course, she's well known for being on Westworld, and she was in Crash and Solo, the, to me, kind of underrated Han Solo Star Wars film, although that's another one where I think her character was like written out of the movie when they switched directors, and another one like this where she gets a great introduction and then she's kind of sidelined, which is disappointing.
Yeah. Also just, beautiful. She's so talented,
Yes.
But she's also beautiful. Like you look at her and you're like, this woman is striking here.
She is. I mean, and that is important when you're trying to go toe to toe with Tom Cruise, who is also beautiful, and you need to really have that, be able to match up to him, I think.
I think you're right there, Josh. The one actor we haven't mentioned who I think is not utilized here is Brendan Gleeson, who plays the BioSite CEO. And I love Brendan Gleeson. He's amazing. I loved him in Banshees of Inisherin, and I like seeing anything that this guy does.
Yeah, he's very good, and there's not a lot to that part in this film. He's just kind of generic, greedy CEO guy, and he doesn't get to do much. But yeah, underused, certainly. Like you said, John Polson doesn't do much, but I found it kind of fascinating that more than acting, he's known as the founder of Tropfest, which is a short film festival that is no longer exists. It's been on hiatus since 2019, but at one time was the largest short film festival in the world that started in Australia, where he's from. And when they had the first ever American edition of Tropfest at the Cosmopolitan here in Las Vegas, I attended that in 2012.
Did you write about it?
I did. I said it was an evening that was both awkward and exciting in its juxtaposition of film culture and strip nightlife. So
Josh quoting himself.
Quoting myself there from Las Vegas Weekly, my article about Tropfest. I don't know if John Polson was there. I didn't mention it in my article.
Hey, Josh, I wanted to, on Gleason, obviously in Bruges, and he's really fun in Paddington too. But have you ever watched any of the real Irish movies he does? Friggin' Banshees counts as that, but The Guard and Cavalry, these are really storied films in Irish film history. I'm excited to check them out.
Yeah, I've seen both of those, and those are from the brother of the Banshees of Inisherin director, Martin McDonagh, who wrote and directed that, and his brother John Michael McDonagh is the one who made The Guard and Cavalry. So I did see those, and those were pretty good, and those impressive family there.
Yeah, they're doing fine. We mentioned Ving Rhames doing a lot of voice acting work. Josh, are you going to do it, or am I?
You can give it a shot if you want.
Arby's, we have the meat.
That's pretty good. I have to say that was actually pretty good. You know what? I've seen that commercial multiple times, and I forgot that was him. But yeah, I mean, like I said, you look at his filmography, and it's just all these B movies and kind of TV guest appearances and whatever, and then a Mission Impossible movie, and then more of that stuff. But he works very, very steadily. He's done a lot of TV stuff. He was Kojak in a very short-lived revival of Kojak and things like that. I mean, he's always getting work, and he's always even, he's one of these character actors where even if you're watching something and it's pretty dreadful, if he shows up, he'll bring a little spark to whatever he's in.
Tons of voice work. Like I said, he's going to be in the Garfield movie. This film, Josh, The Instigators, sounds like it could be fun. A botched robbery causes two thieves to go on the run, dragging along one of their therapists in the process.
Sure. Nice. Does he play the therapist?
I don't know. I don't know who he plays, but I'm all in on Ving Rhames, dude.
Yeah, he's good, and like you said, I'm sure he's getting some nice Mission Impossible paychecks that he doesn't have to. He doesn't have to do the Tom Cruise stunts, so it works out well for him.
I think he does all his own typing on the computer.
Yeah, he probably does. So, and
yeah, we should mention, I'm going to butcher his name, but Rade Serbedzia, is that how you pronounce it?
I'm not sure. Yeah, who plays the scientist?
Yeah, you would recognize him. I always remember him from The Saint, but X-Men First Class, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1. Just a tried and true character actor there.
Yeah, he's often playing, those sort of I feel like either villain characters or scientists, when they need a generically foreign guy. Unfortunately, he ends up in that position. But, he's good. He's good for what he needs to do. And because of the mask thing, he gets to play Ethan Hunt at one point, which is probably fun for him.
Very, very exciting.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
There is one important piece of legacy you guys got to mention here. The 2003 MTV Movie Awards with Ben Stiller as Tom Cruise, the stuntman for Tom Cruise, which is one of the best, award show bits I think there's ever been.
Yeah, Ben Stiller does a great Tom Cruise. I think Tom Cruise, this one won 2 MTV Movie Awards.
I think so. Yeah, because it was huge at the time. Amongst that, cool, quote unquote.
Yeah, the cool people who watch the MTV Movie Awards. Yeah. I do remember that, and I did enjoy it. Do we want to say anything about the Limp Bizkit song?
It's terrible.
It is terrible. I will say that the other big song from this movie, which is I Disappear by Metallica, which is generally, I think, considered one of Metallica's worst songs, I quite like it. So,
all right. Well, the important thing about that is that it leaked on the internet, on Napster. And this was part of the reason that the Napster Metallica suit happen. Lars, you villain.
And Lars was 100% right.
Yeah, I was going to say, Lars not a villain. Lars 100% right here. Yes.
Lars, you villainous son of a gun. So, yeah.
So that is Mission Impossible 2. And that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. Give us your missions online and on social media.
You can find me at Jason Harris Comedy or J Harris Comedy on all the socials. Check out, hey, Eat This Comedy. That show's coming back. I'm Go for Jason on Letterboxd, and I have been using the hashtag Awesome Movie Year. Now, am I supposed to do that all as one word or as 3 different words?
I believe it says 3 different words.
Mm-hmm.
Whew, then I've been doing it right. We're at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on Chimera.
You can find a bunch of things about Mission Impossible movies from me that I did a big rewatch and wrote about them at Josh Bell Hates Everything a while ago at joshbellhateseverything.com, as well as a bunch of other old stuff. I am at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, at Signal Bleed on that platform, Twitter, Chimera, whatever, as well as at Signal Bleed on Blue Sky and Letterboxd. And definitely use the hashtag Awesome Movie Year if you are on Letterboxd and you review one of the movies that we talk about on the show. We'd love to hear what you think. Check out our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. I think we covered 2 Mission Impossible movies at this point. You can follow us on social media at Piecing Pod and check out my music for free because, like Lars said, Napster destroyed the world of music on all the streaming services. Look for David Rosen.
Dave, have you ever done a Mission Impossible style theme song for anything?
That's a good question. I don't think I have. I should, though, like a big action epic type thing. I would love to do that.
You could definitely beat Limp Bizkit, Dave.
I think so. Yeah.
High praise there. Jason, what do we have in our next episode?
Josh, the timing is right as our friend Jonathan Glazer just won international feature for the Zone of Interest. We're going to go back to his first feature, an amazing film called Sexy Beast. Spoiler alert, I like this movie.
So tune in next time for Sexy Beast, and thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.
This podcast will self-destruct in 5 seconds.